It is 23 degrees centigrade here in Abuja. A very good morning to you all. Welcome to Sunrise Daily. Today, I'm Chamberlain Oso.
Am I happy to have company this morning?
Hey.
Well, you bet I certainly am. Good morning and welcome this lovely Wednesday It's Wednesday, right? Just making sure Wednesday.
Yeah, you can check and check.
I'm bad with days. I'm bad with days and dates. So I always
let the calendar remind us.
Yes, indeed. So calendar in Abuja.
AKA
Mr. Makinde.
What's today again? When you are sleeping, what's today's dates?
Just to remind you, it's August 14.
August 14. Yeah, I know.
And it's a Wednesday morning.
Thanks be to God. I got that. I got that right.
Anyway, I'm Ayo Makinde. Good morning and welcome. It's not to say that you didn't have company before now? Oh, you had an industry.
Well, don't let me sing that song. Then be one, be later become three. I think it's the other way around now.
Okay, so have a look at this. This is another part of the country where we bring you this right here. Look at that. There you go. The famous Kano. Yes, number one, Kano. You know, there are different parts of Kano that you may miss because, for instance, this road you see right here is the Eastern Bypass Road. It leads to Maiduguri and then Dutse, the capital of Jigawa State. Police College. You remember that time we were battling Wudil? Well, Wudil, and also Yankaba, as a matter of fact, it's the place they could refer to as the International Vegetable Market. The one with the Lagos fish market, you don't know it's international or local, but this, they put the word deliberate, International Vegetable Market.
Yeah, but I take them seriously when they tell you that, Jim.
Yeah, so you know you can find all sorts there then. So the bridge is called Muhammadu Buhari Bridge. The place is also called, I don't know if I get this name right, Hotoro Roundabout. So in Kano Metropolis. So a 3-step interchange, which you get to, if we go in a little further, you may get to see that if you haven't. So it stretches between the Kano Eastern Bypass Road and Kano Maiduguri Road, also named after President Muhammadu Buhari. So quite an interesting scenery here.
Yeah, a very beautiful piece of engineering, I must say. Quite spectacular to see when you look at it from afar, especially. But when you zoom in a little closer, whilst it is that we must, continue to...
So here's the zooming in.
Yeah, that's the zooming in now. We must continue to praise ourselves for what it is that we're able to do. But we need to also keep an eye on maintenance, which is the bane of all that we do in Nigeria. We're really good with building things, but keeping them is another kettle of fish. And by keeping them, I mean the small things. So you can see on the side of the bridges now, of the roads, for instance, you can see sand already accumulating and narrowing the road, which is really a shame, really, because as time goes on, before you know what's happening, what ought to be a 2-lane road will now become essentially a 1-lane road because we're not keeping it, because we're unable to sweep and keep it clean. I know that they might argue now that, it just rained. It's because this, it's because that. But this is something that ideally we should have in our cities. Even in our villages, we keep the roads there clean. I mean, rural as communities are, you find villagers sweeping their compounds every morning, sweeping areas around their roads. But for us in the cities, it is particularly important that we invest in road sweepers. If we're not able to invest in the machinery, we have more than enough people who can do this work for us. Keep the cities clean. This is really beautiful, as I said, in terms of the engineering, but you can see that, maintenance is grossly lacking here.
Should we just throw that at one of the constitutional responsibilities, of local government administration?
Absolutely. Why not?
Because if they were active and the governor were to pass this route, he can summon the local government chairman and get, Bigida, what's going on here?
There's no reason why they should not be active.
Absolutely. Especially now. Well, of course, we hear that the finance minister says it'll take about three months or thereabout for them to readjust. Look, I love the fact that, of the architectural masterpiece that it is. It's the second that I'm seeing in the country. And imagine that, it's in the north.
Adamawa has something like that.
Adamawa has exactly like these 3 levels. It's really, really beautiful. So you don't go looking for them in China.
And I hope that at night, the last layer at the bottom, I hope it lights up because I certainly won't want to pass there if there's no light.
Especially, I mean, what you also observed there about the fact that it's not cleaned also speaks to whether or not it's in use.
Yeah.
Because if it is in use and as busy as it should be, I'm pretty sure that
I tell you something. If something is in use, but if it's not kept, and I see this problem, it's something that Lagosians take. I mean, for all the fun we make of Lagos and its traffic, I mean, we just heard our colleague Anne talk about how is it Maryland to Ojota or somewhere is very blocked, and you should pass another route. For all the fun we make of Lagos and its traffic, that is something that Lagos has been able to get right. Important. You know, maintaining the roads, making sure that it looks like a proper road. If it's a 3-lane road, you can see the lanes clearly marked and the sides clearly well swept.
Yeah.
It's something that Abuja still hasn't been able to get right, sadly. It's something that many cities, that's why I'm reluctant to blame a local government chairman here. I'm not talking about some rural community. I'm talking about a city center. It should be the prerogative of whatever commissioner, if it's the commissioner for maintenance, if it's commissioner for works, if it's whoever it is, you know, that has been in charge of that should ensure that the city is well kept and is very well swept. I mean, I said Abuja too is struggling in that particular regard.
Well, I just came, so he might tell me, because when you were speaking, I was just thinking that maybe it's Third Mainland Bridge or Lagos about the expressway. Because in terms of maintenance, there are some roads that need help.
No, I'm not talking about potholes. Let's not mix it up. I'm not talking about potholes. Potholes is another kettle of fish. And even that Lagos is beginning to fail.
Exactly.
In fact, it is failing, you know, woefully in that particular regard. Shamefully so. But in terms of sweeping, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Sweeping and getting dirt off the road, they are still getting that one right. Let's not mix it up.
While I agree with you about whether or not the state governments are doing what they should do in terms of the cleanliness and maintenance and all, the reason I mentioned the issue of the local government chairman is they would be able to notice. The same way state governments notice that these things aren't done right, let's fix it and then go get our money back. The local governments should be able to do the same.
All right, let's go ahead and talk to you about what to expect today. For instance, in Abuja by 10 o'clock, the SNB, we call it Society of Nigerian Broadcasters. Well, there you go. They'll be having the meeting today. So largely, as you've seen there, they need to reposition certain things and ensure that a lot goes right this morning.
It's actually the inaugural conference of the Society of Nigerian Broadcasters.
And it is something to be proud of,
Absolutely.
Something to be proud of, because for a very long time, I do know that, I think it was Mr. Tony Momo, when he was minister of the Federal Republic, who tried to, you know, put broadcasters in a class of their own to say, look, this is not just a job that any Tom, Dick, and Harry, because they have a camera, can. And that time there was no camera. But I think that he saw the future, that this was something that had to be specialized. So it's a good thing that this is happening, and it's something to really broadcasters who practice professionally can be proud of. And truly own this one, Society of Nigerian Broadcasters.
And what would surprise you, Malkwe, is that this dates back, what will surprise many, is that this society dates back to 1962 from information available to me. Resurfaced again in 1994, never really got off the ground until now. So now that it is taking off, ain't no stopping us now.
So all other associations or professional bodies or regulatory bodies, this is just different. It's not a competition,
absolutely,
so to speak. So
they
have their various functions, so they shouldn't see it as such. So there you go. Just to put that on out there. But you also have election security matters. I think the Interagency Consultative Committee will be meeting and talking about election security. Ooh, look, you could write a book about all of it. Almost every Nigerian who has gone to vote could write a paragraph, a chapter in anyone's book about election security. Is it how you go to vote and they snatch or they stop you, or how they waylay you, or how they block you and say, hey, look, if you're not voting for my candidate, shift, or how they tell you can't even come out. So all sorts go on. While sometimes those who are in security uniform have their hands in their pockets, looking the other way.
Okay, I'm just gonna, look the other way of that story. Skip to business. Business Morning on Sunrise Daily. We'll be talking about something that's also in the news. We'll get to that in a bit. Expectations from food import duty waiver. Remember that's position of the federal government? Well, let's see if this has something to do with it. Wait for
More
that.
food.
Yeah. Business Morning on Sunrise Daily has more on that at 10 o'clock.
So if you think it's about more food, just wait and watch. I'm be sure to see if they have the money to even import in the first place.
No, we have to take conversations around food very seriously. So please wait till 10 o'clock and see what the expectations around food.
Because if you don't like food, let me see your hand.
It's not money we're talking here.
I don't know anybody who doesn't like food. And tell me, do you eat to live or live to eat?
All of the above.
Chicken
all
and egg.
Tickets, all of the above.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and take you through the dailies this morning. I will do that.
One of the most prominent stories in the news yesterday was the Council of State meeting, which some of the papers highlight today. Daily Independent: End bad governance. Gowon, Abdulsalami, Jonathan Buhari decry protest, regime change. And the writers passed vote of confidence on Tinubu at Council of State meeting. NSA reassures nobody will truncate hard-earned democracy. Wait till 2027, FG tells President Tinubu's opponents. That story continues on the inside pages. The Nigerian News Direct: Jonathan Buhari, NGF, others pass vote of confidence on Tinubu amidst economic downturn. Council of State warns against insurrection, supports democratic process. Finance Minister presents update on economy, highlights progress under Tinubu. That story is on page 3. This Nigerian newspaper has protest was plot to topple Tinubu, ex-presidents declare. Buhari, Jonathan, Abdulsalami, Gowon rally behind current administration. Obasanjo, Babangida absent at Council of State meeting. That story is also on the front page of the Daily Times newspaper. State of the Nation: Tinubu secures vote of confidence by ex-presidents, governors at Council of State meeting. Catholic bishops chide president, urge reversal of petrol subsidy removal. The details on page 2. Blueprint newspaper: Council of State passes confidence vote on Tinubu. Gowon, Abdulsalami, Jonathan Buhari, Akpabio endorse president's reforms. Describe recent protests as attempted regime change. Other stories on the front pages today include this one on the front page of the Nigerian Tribune. Constitution review: reps move to reduce cost of elections. Push for conduct of all elections in one day. Stories on page 11. Daily Trust newspaper has a very interesting story. Nigeria wasting rice, yam, fish amidst food crisis. What report is saying that? Get the details on page 4. Of course, that Council of State meeting story is also right there at the bottom of the page. The Guardian newspaper, also a troubling one here. National Health Insurance Act: 2 years after, states under-enroll as 90% Nigerians still pay out of pocket. Some infographic on the front page and the details on page 6 of the paper. Ballooning operating costs. NCC stakeholders kick as telcos threaten service outage. Look at the riders. Telcos threaten to adopt load shedding formula in telecom services. NCC kicks, says subtle threat, wrong approach to the tariff hike campaign. Subscribers will hold regulator accountable if load shedding happens, as from NATCOM. That story on the Council of State is also right there on the front page with a picture Tinubu receiving Jonathan and Buhari. Hunger protest, attempted regime change, as from the Council of State. These are some of the stories headlining the papers this morning.
But my first take this morning is on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper, and it is related to something that Chamberlain said the other time when he said, if you're not taking food seriously, raise your hand. Well, if you look at what is on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper, I don't know whether you will raise your hands or actually protest. Look at it. Nigeria wasting rice, yam, fish amid food crisis. It's according to a report. In fact, if you dig into that story, you'll find out that Nigeria is responsible for almost 70% of the world's production of yam. Nigeria is responsible, let me say that again, for almost 70% of the yam produced in the world. In that same story, it says Nigeria is responsible for between 20 and 30% of post-harvest losses in yam. Yam.
Yam that we cannot buy anymore.
Yam.
Do you know when last I bought a tuber of yam?
I don't know whether I should say fortunate or privileged to buy yam, yesterday, and someone gave me some.
You bought yam yesterday?
Yes.
He's a millionaire.
How? Yes, he is.
For 4,000 naira.
That's good. That's a really good price.
I'm telling you.
4,000
Why do you think I bought it?
4,000
Only
naira.
because the price is good.
Maybe I should go and try. Maybe, who knows?
All things are possible to them that believe. But the point that I'm making there is the fact that we are still responsible. We can still hear that Nigerians are wasting yam. It's unthinkable.
In this season.
Exactly. And added to that, they say we are also wasting rice. And rice has byproducts running into tens of millions of tons that Nigeria produces, and we still waste them. And they also talked about us wasting fish. So maybe there is some questions that need to be asked, or maybe there is some support that some farmers need to get this out of the way.
Yeah.
We have a food crisis, and we're wasting food. It doesn't
add up. Well, that's also because, the part of the reason why we're in this food crisis, and I think quite a number of other media houses have done, some work in this regard as to why we're in this food crisis. We've still not been able to manage our post-harvest losses. A lot of farmers are still crying, not because their harvest wasn't good, but because when they are done harvesting, storage, transportation to the markets, that's where they lose a lot of their products. Are you talking about farmers who are doing vegetable, onions? All you have to do is have a situation whereby the truck breaks down on the road.
Or the roads are bad.
And the roads are bad. And there goes the produce. Just the other day, we were reporting that floods took over the roads in Bauchi and in some instances, cut off connection between, entire communities and states. So if you have that sort of situation and people are transporting food, what then happens to the food? So amidst this crisis, this food crisis where it is very difficult to buy certain foods, you will still have foods, being wasted. It's such a shame. It's an embarrassment. But I don't think that the thing to do is to lament. What I find a little, disappointing is the fact that year in, year out, we know that this is the problem. Year in, year out, we've been able to diagnose it. What are we doing about it? How can we say that, we know what the problem is? How are we reducing that particular challenge? I mean, even if it's by 5-10%, if we're going to be reducing the challenge incrementally, we can't wipe it all off at once. But if we're actually making an effort to reduce it, by now we should be recording some progress.
It's not for lack of, sorry, Chimele, it's not for lack of thinking or ideas. For how long have we been talking about the special agro-industrial processing zones, backed by the federal government, to be championed by the states, private sector-led, state government, power backed, but private sector-led? We're still talking about them, and we know that the first phase of about 7 states have already been, they're almost getting to the last end of discussions. So let's hope that when that comes up, at least something will be able to help save this agro-industrial processing zones, and they're in tens of tons of land spaces. So let's hope that there's an end in sight to that. But the fact that we're talking about this, and we, as you said, we've known all these problems for so long. Why is it taking us so long?
Well, the fallout of the protest is what sticks out for me. The Council of States meeting yesterday, part of which the NSA did have a briefing, and then subsequently there was that address by the some who attended, including the Minister of Solid Minerals, where it appeared that though the thinking of government is that, as far as they were concerned, that was an effort for regime change. So, and then all those flags that were flown, what do they actually mean? I know the ECOWAS chiefs of defense staffs met some time ago. They also try to call attention to certain things and ensure that there's peace in the sub-region. So that and more are part of what we will be discussing in just a moment. So stay on with us.
It's the first National Council of State meeting of this administration. In attendance are governors, the President of the Senate, some ministers, and former Chief Justices of Nigeria, as well as presidential aides. Former Presidents Muhammadu Buhari and Goodluck Jonathan were physically present, while retired Generals Abubakar Abdulsalam and Yakub Gowon joined the meeting virtually. President Bola Tinubu arrives to preside over the meeting. Over 5 hours later, a delegation arrives to outline the highlights of the meeting. As expected, the recent hardship protests were considered following a report by the National Security Advisor, Mr. Nuhu Ribadu, on the security situation in the country and the protest.
The council thanked Nigerians at large for resisting any unconstitutional move to change government. If anybody is not satisfied with the government, any current administration, there's always an election coming. So you wait for election and cast your vote the way you deem fit.
Aside from Mr. Dele Alake, 6 other ministers made presentation to the council on the progress made in each sector of the economy, with emphasis on economic diversification. According to the Minister of Finance, the council commended the economic drive of the current administration, which according to him is yielding positive results.
In broad terms, the economy is growing. The balance of payments, in particular, the trade balance and the current account balance, are in surplus. The exchange rate is stabilizing. And inflation, though high, uncomfortably high for the liking of Mr. President and his team, it is slowing and it is set to fall.
The Kwara State Governor said the council commended the president after listening to the presentations by the ministers.
The high note of the meeting was the unanimous passage of a vote of confidence on President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, Commander-in-Chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces. Members, especially those of the Nigerian Governors Forum, were satisfied with the presentation by the members of the Federal Executive Council.
Following this meeting, the governors went into another meeting with the president, this time a closed-door meeting where they say they had a fruitful discussion, which made them realize that they are on the same page. They also had a high point in that meeting when another vote of confidence was given to Mr. President. From the presidential villa, Lanre Lasisi, Channels Television News.
All right, so we've got Ambassador Abdul Fattah Musa here with us. He is the ECOWAS Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So quite a lot going on, and most recently, this meeting by the Council of States in Nigeria, Abuja, where the National Security Advisor did brief those present, and there were some concerns. And it turned out, which lots of people, it's still unfolding, as a matter of fact, because for a lot of people, they thought, look, they went out there, normal protests as a result of the hunger, what they're going through, trying to point out their economic situation, which to them is not good. But from security perspective, they think that from what they have garnered, about billions of naira, dollars that have been seized for those who were, according to them, contributing to this protest, and then the flying of Russian flags raising more concerns. I know ECOWAS Chiefs of Defense staff did meet some time ago to see how they could also, towards having a lot of peace in the sub-region. So for you, is there any cause of concern from what you've seen about the protest and the news coming through so far?
Yes. There is, cause for concern over the recent protests in across, Nigeria. The concern is not about the right of people, the young people, the unemployed, and others who feel that they are being shortchanged. They are hungry and they are angry. So that right is enshrined in the Constitution, and I think the Nigerian government allowed for peaceful demonstration. That is the beauty of democracy. The other aspect of it is the demonstration being hijacked by interest in order to move the agenda beyond the immediate concerns of the demonstrators. And that is going as far as calling for the military to step in. And the worst of it all is the flying of foreign flags during, these demonstrations, in the country. And it reflects a wider malaise in the region that for some time now, West Africa and Africa broadly is becoming an arena of a new Cold War. Where the NATO powers and their followers, the BRICS, you are talking about Brazil, Russia, India, China, and what have you, and their supporters on the other hand. And then you've got in the middle powers, middle level power from the Middle East and others who are all now involved in the political discourse and developments in Africa. So if you look at the color of the flags, and I don't want to name them, it reflects this divide. What are the characteristics? Those flying those flags are mimicking where the region has experienced military takeovers in the country. You are talking about Mali, you are talking about Niger, you are talking about Burkina Faso in particular. And those flags are those behind them. So the symbolism of those flags is that we need military takeovers here as well. And that we've got supporters who will, come and support you like they are supporting these coup countries. That is the symbolism of it. And for me, the danger of it is most of the young people who are demonstrating are just about a generation old.
Yeah.
Okay, they are a generation old. They never experienced military coups before. So for them, they see the romance in it. All right, but
that can be a danger.
Is different.
So, but the thing now is this. While it is difficult or it may be challenging for several people who were part of that protest to actually say, well, yes, that was a thing, but this other reality exists. So for you, how does, say, probably ECOWAS intelligence unit or team or arm take this? Because while you have people in this country who feel, look, I genuinely went out there to protest, so why should I be concerned about that? And then you see those flying foreign flags. So does ECOWAS think, the security unit following that meeting, is there such that, well, maybe somebody is trying to fly a kite to score political points? So is the team able to distill all of these things? How do they regard it? Is it high alert, mid-level alert, or what exactly in ECOWAS?
See, there are fifth columnists in each country. There are internal forces who would want destabilization because they will benefit from it. But if you follow the ECOWAS statement, which was issued shortly after the attacks by terrorist groups and the Tuareg rebellion in the northern part of Mali, just around 24th to 27th of July, last month, ECOWAS clearly, stated, that it will do everything to fight the transformation of our region into another arena of superpower confrontations. And why did we say that? The dichotomy in the Russian, Ukraine war is being played out in West Africa with the Ukrainians, the ambassador in Senegal, and the chief of their intelligence in Ukraine saying that they provided intelligence and more to those who carried out those attacks. So it means the war in Ukraine is being transferred and being played out also in Africa.
This is despite Africa's insistence on being neutral, because a lot of African countries came out in the wake of that war to say that they weren't going to take sides. So in spite of it, it does appear that somehow, we're beginning to see an incursion of, that particular battle entering into Africa.
Absolutely. Today.
What about because that's not the only war that's currently playing out, because we've also seen the influence of the war between Israel and Gaza. I mean, the incursion of Israel into Gaza and how that is also playing out, especially with regards to religion. And, religion in Africa is a very sensitive issue as well. So how is that also influencing what is happening on the continent?
Yes. Let me say this, the first, issues first. I couldn't get the first part of your question.
Yeah, which was about the Ukraine. I mean, a lot of African countries saying they were going to be neutral.
Yeah, that is right. At the UN Security Council, that council is paralyzed because it is also divided among the P5 who have veto power. They're divided along those same lines. Right? That is it. So they had to move the debate to the General Assembly of the UN, and most African countries stayed neutral, as far as the request to condemn Russia was concerned, in the Ukraine war, right? But what Ukraine is doing is like it is going to lose more and more friends in Africa. That is number one. Number two, we know that it is the Russian private security company that is supporting the Malian authorities in their fight against the terrorists in the country. So what Ukraine is doing is fighting Russia also on the African continent, which will go very much against its own interests on the continent. And the global scene also reflects what is happening. You just mentioned the attacks on Gaza. The Jewish state is not a Christian state. Okay, they've got their religion. And among the Palestinians, a very large chunk of them are Christians. They are not all Muslims. So it is not, really a religious issue when you are talking about what is happening.
Well, I'm saying that's how it's been interpreted on the continent, in Africa.
Of course, it is because in Africa we are quite gullible. Okay, so that is it. Israel is the birthplace of, Jesus, and then, so all Christians will flock, majority of them, to support them, right? That is one. But what we forget is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is also in Israel. You see that people do not, take, into consideration. But looking at the broader issues in Africa, terrorism, particularly the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, they are also instrumentalizing faith. Even though most of the people where they operate are Muslim, they still interpret which is the proper Muslim and which is not. And this has also transferred into ethnic animosity. Who is a Fulani? Who is not a Fulani? Who is a herder? Who is a farmer? So all these are being instrumentalized by those who want to destabilize the continent. And leading them are these terrorist groups.
All because one way or the other, Africa and its sub-regions are perceived as some kind of go-to right now. I find it very interesting that Europe is as united as it is, even though a European country and another European country, in this case Russia, even though part of it is in Asia, fighting, so to speak, at war. But a few things happened, and they've been able to keep themselves both economically and politically together. Now, look at all of the things that are happening in West Africa, with some West African countries making statements as to wanting to exit from ECOWAS. And I find that very interesting. While all of that is happening in Europe, none of it is, some similar things are happening in West Africa, yet it seems that the effect is more politically severe in West Africa than it is in Europe. What does that speak to about whether or not the West African authorities, and particularly ECOWAS as an authority itself, has enough influence, political or economic influence, on its member states?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Don't forget, the most terrible wars that we found, that the world has experienced, have always originated in Europe. And I agree with you, through the ashes of the First World War, Second World War, EU is born, which is trying to bring, them together. But Africa's situation has been since independence, right? Africa gained independence at the height of the Cold War, if you remember, where you had a bipolar world, the East and the West, and African countries fell into these camps, were used by others. So Africa's exploitation goes way back, to the post-independence era. And then at some point, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it seems like the world was moving multilateral. We're going to have a multilateral world, and it also coincided with the time that there was unity in Africa. As far as basic principles of democracy, human rights were universally accepted. You hardly found coup d'etats from about 1992, when Africa transited. And you see the mirror, of what happened in the 60s, 70s is what we are seeing now, but now in a more diverse way, which means Africa has not learned, its history. That what happened during the Cold War, and African countries were being used as vassal states, as proxies in superpower battles, is now being repeated on the continent, and this time using proxies, because Ukraine is not a power that you can talk about. It's also a proxy of Western powers being used as an instrument, also to, fight the other side. That is the Russia, the Chinese influence, and others on the continent. And the sad thing is that Africa is drawing itself into, that picture.
And what do you think makes that possible? Because Africa has its serious peculiar problems, one of which is poverty. And the issues around good governance among the various countries is not just a West African thing. It's not just a Nigerian thing. It's an African thing. But let's stick with our own West Africa, particularly because the effect of the not so good governance in recent time has led to military putsch in some areas. And what is happening in Nigeria is no less significant. So what are we, or what should we be communicating to the young people to let them see that we own our own and we shouldn't be dancing or parleying to certain sentiments as you're talking about now?
I think member states, for example, of ECOWAS, have a responsibility to reassure the young people, that democracy, human rights are not empty slogans, and that it has to be backed up by really giving meaning, to life to these young people. The young people in West Africa constitute a minimum 60% of the population. And if you see the disturbances that are going on, it's because they are disenfranchised, they are marginalized, and others. And it is very important that member states live up to that. The beginning is good governance, which begins with political good governance. The political aspect of it, that is no manipulation of constitutions in our member states, and that there should be inclusivity in the governance process, and those are key principles. And ECOWAS is reviewing its supplementary protocol on democracy and good governance, to ensure, that manipulating constitutions and electoral processes becomes more and more difficult. But the most important thing is it is citizens who can make it work and not the norms. If you look at what is happening in parts of West Africa and what recently happened in Senegal, it gives you the contrast. In Senegal, citizen action, the strength of institutions made it impossible, for the ruling party in power to derail the normal course of politics in the country. In other parts where the citizenry is dormant, and you have a graveyard stability in the country, then the rulers will do whatever they want. So building the capacity of institutions, the citizenry, is also a supportive plank, to the normative reforms that we are, talking about. That is number one. Number two is the economic aspect. And ECOWAS, given what has happened in the region, the heads of state at the July summit in Abuja decided that ECOWAS should lead a special summit, not a summit of heads of state, a special summit on the future of regional integration. ECOWAS were created first and foremost for economic, purposes, right? And it is the realities of our region about the collapse of states. Liberia, Sierra Leone, Nigeria had to lead ECOMOG into this country to stabilize them. And it was all out of bad political governance in those countries, with people seeking more freedom from autocratic and military regimes in the region, right? So ECOWAS had to pivot, into the political arena, because you cannot carry out economic integration without when stability. There is instability everywhere.
That seems to be overshadowing some of the economic objectives of ECOWAS.
Yes, and ECOWAS has achieved a lot when it comes to the economic, the economic field, in terms of the, ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme that is supposed to push African countries to add value, to their raw materials and other things. Is the free movement. People, I can't take it for granted. It is a major achievement, and West Africa is about the only country now, the only region, where there is visa-free travel. People do not take that also for granted. There are a whole lot of interventions in the economy, but the bulk stops at the member states level.
So there are several things that come to mind listening to you on this. Several. I mean, is it about the objectives? What is it that ECOWAS is going to do specifically to ensure that their member states, the heads of those member states, don't keep manipulating the elections? Because if you look at some of the key objective and some of the thread of the protesters in some of these countries, largely in Africa, where they have happened, the people always complain, number one, about elections not properly done. Some you get to hear our leaders are puppets, either to IMF or some of these bodies. They keep wondering, why do they have to go to some of those countries to have those meetings before you come back here? Do they select you, then you force it on us? So they still don't believe that they are genuine leaders who mean well for those countries. And that's why we wonder what specifically ECOWAS will do in those reforms that you're talking about. How do they address all of this? Can ECOWAS, can Africans help themselves from these countries that want to keep using us as playground?
No, absolutely. I think I alluded to that in my earlier response. That is, if you look at our liberal democracy as an experience from about the 1992 up till now, what are its strengths? So far, there have been progress up until 2019. All presidents in our region were democratically elected. The level of transparency in the elections that brought them to power varies from country to country. But that was the fact. And since 2020 till now, we've had about 4 successful coups, many unsuccessful coups, right? And some of the coups, particularly in Guinea, the basis was manipulated electoral process by the then sitting president, right? So ECOWAS has realized that at the core of the constitutional convergence criteria of ECOWAS membership is separation of powers. If you look at West Africa, some of our parliaments are now becoming more combative. They are not monocolor. You go to countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Cabo Verde, Senegal, you just see that the government, the ruling party does not have it its own way. The parliament is very, very balanced. Okay, which is progress in the liberal democratic sense. The executive is what it is. The parliament is supposed to also check the executive, but the weakest link in our democracy is the judiciary. The judiciary up till now is the one that has been instrumentalized against opposition, that has been used to manipulate constitutional reviews and other things to maintain people in power. So there is a lacuna when it comes to the judiciary in West Africa. And we've been working a lot.
It is interesting at this same judiciary which your finger was the saving grace in Senegal. The judiciary, stood up to the challenge and really saved the day when the question was put before it. And that's why Senegal was able to hold very successful elections. So what do you think, made the judiciary in Senegal stand out?
Absolutely. There are many reasons, right? The thing is that you are just citing one example. Okay, the beauty of the electoral challenges that we have in the region is that in many countries, Nigeria, they being the latest one, Ghana in the last elections and others, the judiciary was used, instead of going to the street or taking up arms, losing parties and candidates resorted to the legal framework, right? And where the legal framework is weak, then there is a problem. In Senegal, I started by saying that what Senegal has is resilient institutions. That is one strength of Senegal. And that since independence, 1960, there hasn't been a coup d'etat in the country. It is the only country alongside Cabo Verde where you've never had a military takeover in West Africa. That is one. And what also pushed the judiciary to do that, don't forget that when the president wanted to postpone the elections, the ruling coalition and the key opposition came together and blamed the same judiciary of taking bribes from their own candidate. The ruling, right. So the judiciary was now, put in a conflict with the executive in the country. If we are the judiciary and you accuse us that we are bribe takers, and then you want us to do your bidding soon afterwards, we are not going to do it. So there are many, reasons. They were accused, and the matter even went to court by the judiciary accusing the executive of trying to accuse them of taking bribe because their presidential candidate, through their own survey, realized that he could not win the election.
I find it interesting that you put it that way.
And so, so this is what, what happened over there, in terms of Senegal. But I would say broadly, our judiciary is quite weak. And it is constitutional reviews that many have used to maintain themselves in power. Forget about electoral manipulations. If people are able to mobilize and police their vote, it's going to be incrementally very difficult for anybody to manipulate. But the executive, what they do is changing when the tenure is coming to an end through a constitutional review, and they say, okay, we send the clock back to zero, so that the terms that I have already said do not count because we have a new constitution. Now, ECOWAS is pushing in the review that if you, a sitting president, leads a process of constitutional review, you will not benefit from it.
Interesting.
Okay, so those are some of the innovative ways that we are, working on.
Perhaps that also speaks to something, Ambassador.
Yes.
My apologies for butting in. Perhaps that also speaks to the fact that you've been talking about the government, you've been talking about institutions of government, separation of powers, and all of that. However, government is always a system, and there's always a pool of employers. In this case, the people. 60% of these employers are young people, as you said the other time.
Yes.
Now, isn't it fallacious to assume that governance or politics starts from the political parties as opposed to the people, particularly in West Africa?
Yes.
Because if there is enough political education, political understanding, I don't think there will be a need for people to be pushing for protests. They will know how to strengthen their institutions, as the example of Senegal that you're giving the other time. So what's the place of political education from your perspective in West Africa, to the point that people can say, we're not going to take this, we're going to insist on this, and there will be no military push?
Mm-hmm. Yes. That is an interesting question. Yes, ECOWAS is engaging together with the civil society groups, across the region. We have got the West Africa Democracy Network, WADEMOS, which cuts across West Africa, which is working on these, questions. But let me say one thing. People do not eat democracy. Okay, and democracy is a process. In our region, it is just about 30 years old, so to speak. There are countries that have practiced democracy for centuries, and up till now, there are even presidents who will not accept results. We saw what happened in the last elections in the US, and then the other, places. So democracy, to give it sustenance, you have to add the economic and social governance to it. And this is what will make, people always defend liberal democracy. If people are hungry and you tell them, that, oh, this is, we are going for elections, we are going for, this and that, it's not going to work. So that is why the developmental aspect, and including these young people, look, the state is not the key employer in our societies. It is the private sector. How do we have public-private partnership, in order to create the environment for employment is key. Number two, I feel that the government has a responsibility to develop infrastructure. I will tell you, young people, you go to the computer, center here in Abuja, in Lagos, and other things, and you see the wonders young people can perform over there with electronics, with their gadgets and things like that. But if these young people, go through darkness, no electricity, they have electricity just about 2 hours a day, they are not going to express their agency. They can employ themselves. In fact, the young people do not need to be fed. They have the qualities. Give them the proper education, give them the infrastructure, that's the basic tool that they need, and you will see the wonders. They will be able to cater for themselves. But in most of our countries, the basic infrastructure is lacking. Medicine, medical facilities, housing, and productive education. Not just going to read and write and other things, but going through STEM education, through, the scientific knowledge to try to empower, young people are all very critical. So this is what, I would say. The government has a role to create the environment for this to happen. And then the private sector has a very useful role. That's why we need to, support our entrepreneurs in the region, in order, to be the useful partner to governments in our region. And I think when the young people, see a bright future in front of them and that they can actually actualize their potential, it also gives strength to the democracy that we are talking about.
All right, we'll have to thank you for coming on, Ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa, ECOWAS Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. All business morning on Sunrise, it will be up on the hour. Don't go away.
Good morning. Welcome to Business Morning on Sunrise Daily. I'm Ini John Mekwa. We do business for just about 30 minutes before we head back to the Sunrise Daily studio. We start from the global space, and we can tell you that oil prices climbed on Wednesday after an industry report that showed that U.S. crude and gasoline inventories fell as the market watched for a possible widening of the Israel-Gaza war, which may impact global oil supply. So we put our eyes on the numbers right there. We see it's green, unlike what we had yesterday. About this time, it was down almost 1%. But today we see it's in the green, 0.7%, $81.25 a barrel. That's for Brent. WTI of the United States, that's also up 0.8%, $78.94 a barrel. And key Middle Eastern oil producer Iran is yet to retaliate. But of course, the uncertainty around that is one of the factors driving the market at this time, as well as expectations today. We expect inflation numbers from the United States. That will also feed into sentiments around oil. Now, back in Nigeria, Nigeria's Minister of Finance, Mr. Waled, was called a high-level meeting to implement President Bola Tinubu's order for the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited, the NNPCL, to sell crude to local refineries in Naira. The meeting was yesterday, and it had key figures such as the Petroleum Minister, the Chief Executive of the NNPCL, FIRS Chairman, and focused on overcoming long-standing challenges in the petroleum sector and enhancing local refinery capabilities. According to the Minister of Finance, this initiative is set to empower local refineries and stimulate growth. A whole lot of conversations have been going on about the demand for crude by local refiners in recent times, obviously led by the Dangote refinery. Now we're expecting the Port Harcourt refinery to come on board. That's another demand of crude, domestically. So we hope these conversations not just end with conversations, but we see the implementation right there, especially after that pronouncement that crude will be sold in Naira to domestic refiners. Now we head to the Naira space and see, not very good picture. For the first time since the Dutch auction system started, we saw the Naira lose the growing steam, the positive steam. At the close of trade yesterday, it went down 0.71% on NAFEM. So while it opened at 1,570 Naira 99 kobo, it closed at 1,582 Naira 9 kobo on NAFEM. NAFEX was a bit of a positive right there, but I mean, the more realistic one would obviously be the NAFEM. So we wonder what's going on here. We know last week the CBN was very heavy, its intervention, the auctions. I think they had about 2 or 3 auctions, even though we still had some demand on METs because of the huge demand that was there before the supply. So perhaps we'll see another intervention from the central bank, and that would, take us back to that positive mood. Now, talking about the central bank, in a move aimed at boosting economic transparency, the Central Bank of Nigeria has reintroduced the publication of several key economic reports. The reports include the Purchasing Managers Index, as the PMI, Business Expectation Survey, and Inflation Expectation Report, among other crucial macroeconomic indicators. According to economist and Chief Executive Officer of Timeline Consult Limited, Mr. Shuaibu Idris, was a guest on Business Incorporated. This is a step in the right direction, and it should promote informed decision-making.
The Central Bank of Nigeria, and indeed Central Bank of any country, is established purposely for a number of reasons. Apart from being banker to the government of this nation, it is supposed to be a repository of data and knowledge. There is supposed to be a research department properly and adequately, staffed and funded, wherein they gather data, analyze, research, and bring out, periodical reports and statistics. I believe maybe Yemi Cardoso has been able to staff the department adequately and fund it, and therefore he's coming out with this. And I think it's a step in the right direction, like I did say, so we can now have a bit of a multiplicity of data to begin to see which one is the best. If you have something, say from financial derivatives, another data from Stanbic IBTC, another data from, say, MBS, the Bureau of Statistics, and then another data from Central Bank of Nigeria. Then you can compare and contrast and see to what extent are these data relevant. And I think it's a step in the right direction. I will say kudos to Yemi Cardoso and his team.
And then we move to the telecom sector, where that sector has been described as being in an intensive care unit, gasping for breath. This was the thought at the Hybrid Telecom Investment Forum organized by the Financial Derivatives Company in Lagos. The Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company, Mr. Bismarck Rawani, was a keynote speaker and organizer of the event, believes that there's an urgent need to rescue the sector from collapse. The future of Nigeria's telecom industry is the concern of Financial Derivatives Company as they sit for Telecoms Industry 2.0 conference to discuss the next investment frontier in Nigeria.
What do we see as Telecoms 2.0 in Nigeria? What do we want to achieve from that? Because the next 25 years will be very different from the last 25 years. But what happens in the next 25 years is a function of what we do, the choices we make, the decisions that we make, and the enabling environment that we create to attract not only domestic capital, but also foreign capital flows into the sector.
Delving into the issues is a panel conversation, and they are discussing the challenge of insufficient infrastructure, which is a major one, as well as policies hampering investment in the space.
Charges, levies, taxes that, again, as an industry, we have to deal with. We want to invest in infrastructure. It takes how many months to actually build the tower, and you have to negotiate, ROW right away. So it becomes quite taxing. But fortunately for us, I think speaking for Airtel in particular, we have a future-looking approach to Nigeria. As said by a very good typology a while back, it is a market that you need to be in if you want to be in the industry. But I think the question is, because if you don't invest in capacity in this particular industry, growth not only of yourself and not only of the industry, but more importantly, the country is going to be impacted in the very near future.
However, this optimism is not shared by some other participants. One of them, the Chief Executive Officer of MTN Nigeria, Mr. Carl Toriola, who joined the meeting virtually. According to Mr. Toriola, there's an urgent need to rescue the sector from collapse as it is in an intensive care unit. He also notes that a fundamental challenge is that the financial returns expected from the industry are now so low that they threaten its very survival. For others on the panel, charting ways forward is priority, and it will include looking inwards.
Being able to source capital locally or align your investment strategy to the realities of local capital and foreign exchange, the skill sets that are available, affordability in the market, and who's going to be able to pay for the services, and the reality that in technology, a lot of the inputs are foreign.
If you look at mangoes or you look at pineapples supplied to Europe, those goods don't get picked from the farms until the plane is actually on the ground at the location. And that's only possible because of the kind of telecommunications and technology that is required. So technology and telecoms plays a key role in aviation, and aviation plays a key role in how markets function.
Sharing ideas and implementing strategies for the telcos was the motivation for the organizer, Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company, Mr. Bismarck Rawani. He believes there's a need.
What came out clearly is that the sector is actually bleeding. And you can see from $8 billion of revenues in 2020, it has dropped to about $3 billion now. So the revenues of this industry is a third of what it used to be, while their costs have increased. Like it was clearly put, this industry is in ICU, intensive care unit. Something needs to be done. What needs to be done? New investment. New investment will not come except the pricing formula is changed. That is what has happened. But it's quite clear that in the environment in which we are, that it's going to be very difficult. But like they said, it is during war that generals are made.
Developing the outcome from meetings such as this to meet up with challenges in the telecoms industry is another foundation to hit the $1 trillion economy, which President Bola Tinubu hopes to achieve by 2030. And that, they say, is another reason for this. Now let's talk about food security. Can run away from that, can we? And it was one of the issues raised there, how developing the telecom sector can actually reduce harvest loss, kind of bring in the food from the farm to the gate. Now let's look at another issue, which is that the federal government, remember, has put in place a 150 import-free duty season for importation of grains, mostly wheat, musk rice, cowpeas, and all of that. How can we expect this to affect the food security space? We know that customs is not very happy about this. They say that the country will lose about 188 billion naira because of the duty suspension for that period of 150 days. But of course, there are other areas. Domestic producers are also not so happy. They say this is another kind of competition to them. But I guess the federal government is focused on food security at this time. Let's discuss some of the impact and how we can maximize this period. Now, we'll do this with Ife Umunna. She's the head of strategy at AFEX. AFEX, we know, is a commodity index board, and so they deal a whole lot with commodities. Hi, Ife, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. So tell me, what side are you on when we look at this import duty or tariff-free period for importation of food? We've heard the pros and the cons. Some, like the customs are counting the costs, that they will have to forego for this period. Domestic producers are thinking about the competition, but obviously the government is just looking at, let's feed the people at this time to reduce the hunger in the land. Where is AFEX in this?
I think for us, we know that it's important. We need it. People are hungry. There's not enough food within our borders, so we have to import. And when you look at the window, it's 150 days. So within that time, there is enough time to ensure that those who are locally producing adequately store their produce to ensure it doesn't waste. As it relates to ensuring that food is available, it's affordable, prices of commodities or produce will reduce, which is what we all want to see. So when it comes to this government intervention to ensure that we are allowing imports for just 150 days, we are in favor of this, definitely.
Yeah, but what about the spillover? And a lot of people have also warned, especially economists, have warned that this is so short, it's a very short-term measure. What are we doing? What are we using the 150 days to do that could, help and boost supply at the end of the 150 days?
So essentially, the 150 days is meant to cover the time between present and harvest, where we will see our local producers ensure that they have harvested their crops and there's more food in the market. During this time as well, both private and public sector are working towards ensuring that we improve our food commodity access and affordability throughout the country. So you see that states such as Niger or Lagos states are working on ensuring food production or food accessibility. Private sector organizations such as AFEX are ensuring that we're able to access or spur the capital markets and spur the access to financing for farmers, whether that's directly through cash or through inputs, so they're able to grow or produce more across various areas in Nigeria. So there are interventions ongoing both for the short term and the long term from private and public, and then partnerships collectively to ensure that we hopefully do not find ourselves in the same situation next year and thereafter.
Yeah, but I mean, I hear you, but I don't think I see a lot of, especially when it comes to the issue of storage, because as we speak now, we know that the price of some perishables like tomatoes and pepper have tapered because it's a harvest period. But then after the harvest period, prices surge again because there's no storage, no preservation for the period after harvest. How much work do you see going on in that space?
So we know that typically 40 to 50% of food is lost to post-harvest losses due to lack of storage. And what we've seen is we need to ensure that firstly, from a government perspective, we replenish the strategic grain reserves and then ensure that there's a constant way of ensuring that those with all the commodities within that stay as should be, as well as getting private sector or different actors to engage in storage, training farmers and other stakeholders within the value chain to engage in storage. But a critical issue around storage is one, infrastructure as well as financing. So this is where you need the private sector to come on board, and this would require ease of doing business from a government perspective when it comes to regulations and bureaucracy to make sure that they're able to invest in storage, and it is seen as something more than just development projects. It's an actual financially viable for private sector actors as well.
So when you say development projects and the coming together of the public and the private sector, how, could you give an example? Do you have people, investors, maybe building warehouses, buying equipment, or how do you see that happening?
So, for instance, at AFEX, we have over 280 warehouses across Nigeria, where we store commodities, both engaging with, again, private and public. We are engaging with both governments from various states and on a federal level to try and push towards more adequate and accessible storaging facilities for farmers. We provide storage facilities for the farmers that we work with, which are over 250,000 across the nation. So there are many examples where storage is a key topic or key aspect for those in the agriculture and food sector, but it does need to increase. We do have inadequate storage facilities in Nigeria. It's not enough for what we are producing or what we hope to produce and what we hope to store, so that we are not, or we get to the point of food security. And I think the key point is storage and infrastructure.
Yeah, so where are these storage facilities? Are they closer to the farm or closer to the gate? And then accessibility of it to the farmers.
So we ensure that we have our warehouses close in distance to the farmers that we work with, or farmer communities, or collectives that we work with, from Kaduna to Katsina, Niger State, Lagos State, the list goes on. But we ensure that there is accessibility for the farmers to our warehouses, where they're able to access these goods, because we also work with various other actors. We have a range of logistic processes that we can use to ensure that food moves. This is not to say that it is not difficult. We are still in Nigeria and we have some fundamental challenges in the process, but we aim to ensure that we're able to do so.
Yeah, so what about maintenance of those storage facilities? For instance, you do need power, electricity, to preserve some of those. How's that going with AFEX?
Naturally, the cost of running such warehouses is high. This is why it is a difficult endeavor for many to embark on. But naturally, as we always say, it would be much easier if we had stable light, if we had affordable, or we had security where one wouldn't have to look into private actors to provide that form of security across the country. So same as infrastructure when it comes to road networks, we need to ensure that we have stable light, that we we have security there's a lack or there's better security across the states and the country as a whole.
What about transporting from the storage facilities to the market? We've heard a lot of transporters, logistics stakeholders talk about checkpoints on the road. You've already talked about the issue of insecurity. Non-state actors also giving them another level of challenge in the process, in the value chain.
So security again becomes an issue when it comes to transportation, because at the point in which we say, even if we do go ahead to ensure our road networks are fixed, the aspects of security will still pose a challenge. So that's one that needs to be quickly rectified in order to ensure that we can move commodities or food from point A to point B without various challenges. As you said, there are checkpoints. You find yourself in positions where corruption is rife, unfortunately. And when it comes to security or in securing our own goods, we ensure that we have, unfortunately, have to use private security to ensure that goods go from point A to point B, given our current scenario. So this is where, or this is why we and a range of other actors continuously ask to ensure that we tackle insecurity across Nigeria and fix our road network so that it is easier to move goods from point A to point B.
So if you could influence the decision and action of the Minister of Agriculture or the ministry itself, what do you think at this time should be giving priority and maybe a target period also that you think can make an impact on our drive towards food security in Nigeria?
I think there's a short-term and a long-term approach. In the short term, we have to ensure that we provide emergency aid and relief to Nigerians across the nation, whether that's through import waivers, which is currently ongoing, or providing some form of transfer of cash or aid where food is subsidized and people can access food. But in the long term, we have to look into how we got into this situation through strategic reserves being diminished. We need to see that that is not a continuous or systemic ongoing challenge. We have to ensure that they are replenished, that there is a plan long-term to see farmers produce adequate amounts with improved seeds so that they're protected against climate change issues. And they are, using advanced or at least modern agricultural technologies to do so. We need to work with both the private sector when it comes to catalyzing finance to ensure that agriculture is a viable and robust sector where government is simply a pillar of support rather than spurring it. But at the moment, they would need to ensure that they are leading the charge in terms of helping us out of this dilemma that we're in.
All right, Ife, thank you so much for that. We do hope that the minister is listening and implementation, well, at least could begin, especially in this period of, the duty-free period. But thank you so much, Ife, head of strategy with AFEX, for your time.
Okay.
That's right. Food security is still a challenge in Nigeria. We'll stay on it until we can eat. I believe. Let's head to the market now, do a little bit of review, see what happened yesterday before I will give you fresh numbers at intraday. That'll be at 1 p.m. But yesterday we saw that the bear still dominated the market. A lot of profit taking going on with major stocks beginning. The all share index dropped actually 0.5%, and yes, we lost the 98,000 level, 97,000. Even the 97 is looking so shaky at the close of trade yesterday. I wonder what the intraday numbers will look like. And it's here to tell us that an equity cap 55.2 after the market lost 279 billion naira, shaved off that market cap yesterday at the close of trade. And so we see the volume, value, and deals looking positive, but don't be moved by that, because there was a lot of profit taking. Banking lost almost 2% at the close of trade. It's because of the fugas. We know that there are issues going on around FBN holding in the court and legal and CBN and Intervene, and it's part of it. Well, we don't know if that's what's driving sentiment around that. But even Zenith Bank, that just carried out their facts behind the offering, and we know that the other banks, FCMB, they're in the market at this time, but investors seem determined to take some profit even in the midst of all of this. Maybe there's a strategy to that. Consumer goods, however, was the only one that scaled through and got to the green territory, almost 1% up, 0.82% at the close of trade yesterday. Even oil and gas that had recovered was in the red, and that's because of profit taking on Japol Gold. Then top trades, we saw GT Co, Access Co, part of the fugas there. Even penny stocks coming up, insurance was also in the red. A lot of profit taking going on right there. Does the saving bond, the federal government saving bond, have anything to do with this? I think Anita should answer that question when he comes in the afternoon. That'll be at 1 p.m. for Business Incorporated. I'll be back with Anita Edit, but now let's head back to the Sunrise Daily Studios.
Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Mr. Andrew Mamedo joins us now. He is the country director for Action Aid Nigeria. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Chamberlain, for having me. Thank you.
Are you surprised about the turnout of this protest? I mean, the narrative coming through from the Council of States.
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely, I'm not surprised. So.
Oh, you were one of those who say, well, you kind of saw this coming?
Yeah, of course. I think if you've noticed, whenever there's an incident like this, a Council of State meeting is always called. So if you go to NSAS, immediately after the NSAS, there's a Council of Meeting. So it's a way of the government trying to get validation. Say, okay, we've got not just the government of the day, but other leaders of the country still in support. So it's a way of saying, oh, Nigerians, we're not just here alone, even past leaders, the Council of States, those that are relevant in that sense, are backing us. But how would you explain the vote of confidence? I think that's pushing it.
Do you think that position of the Council of State is valid in terms of whether or not it's useful, it's functional?
I think it's functional, but the question is, do they serve the purpose of being the conscience of the country? I think that should be the fundamental question. If they exist just for advisory purpose. So technically, the president is not at will to take whatever comes from there. So it's just advisory purpose.
Okay,
but
so
are they able to do that and actually stand as a voice of the citizens?
So that might have been the broad perspective. But what about the factors that they may have, that they considered to arrive at that position? For instance, the part where the NSA had the briefing and pointed out that there were some foreign elements and there were funds that were, according to them, sponsored or donated to ensure that this protest holds. To them, they interpreted that as though, look, these guys were actually doing this to foment trouble and destabilize the country.
Okay, so I think the fundamental question we need to answer is, and the government has not answered that. We all agree that protest is legitimate. So when you say funding of protest, what does that mean? So if you are funding a legitimate cause, is that against the law? The answer is no. So if people are going out for protest and I decide to buy them food, Nigerians are hungry, so I decided to buy them food and I decided to give them water. Some commissioner of police, Lagos, they gave the protesters water. So that's funding the protest. So if it's a legitimate cause and you are funding it, then what is the problem? What is the challenge with that? We need to answer that question.
But if I just ask off the top of my head, for instance, do you need to, if a protest is organic and I feel really low and frustrated, isn't it supposed to be just organic? I hit the streets, I make my mind, bribe my mind, and then, I move on from there. Do I have to be funded to go protest?
Yes and no. So yes and no, because when you have 133 million Nigerians living in multidimensional poverty, when you have some days up to 20 million Nigerians going to bed without food, they would want to protest ordinarily. So with the NSA's presentation, probably what he would have told us is, what is the proportion of those that are calling for change in government and those that are genuinely saying we are hungry? So what is the proportion? So I'm not ruling it out. I'm not saying that there might not be possibility.
So where do we draw the line?
So where you draw the line is you have to go to the root cause of the problem. You need to deal with the root cause of the problem. So let's not have protests. Let's do things that will make people not come to the streets. So it's not about restricting protests. It's not about pushing protests to the stadium or to a particular location. It's about dealing with the fundamentals that would make protests not occur. That is the bottom line. That's what we need to focus on.
Well, protests, in a democracy, some people will say protests are inevitable and they are a fundamental part of people's rights. And people can protest over anything, even in the so-called advanced democracies. We see, young people, we saw what Greta Thunberg did, to bring attention to climate action. Initially, it was a one student protest, and then she got the attention of her classmates, and it grew from there. So even in places that are settled socially, economically, welfare, there are other issues there are other concerns that will eventually come up. However, in a fragile democracy as ours, there are so many issues to protest about, and more so in an economy where things are now dire. We've been seeing the hardship which we're currently facing today has been long foretold. There have been many plans to try and avert it, but even to take those steps, we knew that, those plans were averted, so to speak. Try to save, no, we can save by ourselves. Everything, we've been seeing it. So we knew that this was long coming, but sadly, this was not very well explained to the average, to the common person. When you look at how much it is that we're talking about here being used to fund, if we were to take the NSA at his words, 83 billion naira. This is grievous.
People ask, can that be?
83 billion naira for a protest? Wouldn't that money have been better used if there were not any other? Yeah, for a purpose that would assuage whatever it was that was leading to the protest. So isn't that, shouldn't we be more circumspect whenever it is that whenever it is that, there is a genuine cause, but at the same time, when we hear such, or when we hear that, some funding is going to come into it, shouldn't there be a little more circumspection?
Thank you very much, Mark. So I think it sends a very troubling signal. So beyond just those funds coming in, sends a signal of the people not satisfied. So those in diaspora, if all those money came from diaspora and they were able to send in that much, those monies would have been used for several other things in the country. So for people to feed, for people to infrastructure, so many things. But for us to have 83 3 billion naira.
That's the allegation.
So yeah, that's the allegation.
Yeah.
So let's take the NSA by its word. So if that funding is coming in, it shows that a good number of persons are concerned about the issues. And there is no breakdown of if this funding is coming from Nigerians or non-Nigerians. So if I went, there are lots of people out there that are out of this country and they are hoping that the country gets better, that they come back. So such people would be doing anything to make sure, beyond just changing government. So it's not about changing government. So when you say changing government, it's not, so the protest was about changing, it's about bad governance. So rather than changing government, we're looking at changing bad governance, issues around bad governance. How do we put good governance in place?
I'm not sure you, my apologies.
Yes.
I'm not sure you understand the question that Malpa is asking. If we can raise 84 billion naira, some of it comes in foreign currency, to fund...
Crypto, more specifically.
Yes. Yeah. To fund a protest. Were we waiting for protests to raise that kind of money for developmental purposes? What if we decided, okay, let's do a GoFundMe for people living in multidimensional poverty? We can say, okay, we don't want to do government work for it, but we've always known that government work is not just government work. I'm just trying to piggyback on the question Mark asked you. What if that money had been raised? So, okay, immediately after these protests, these are the developmental initiatives to which we want to put this 84 billion naira.
So the amount that Nigerians in diaspora send to the country alone is the second highest earner of our foreign exchange in the country. So on its own, it's large, it's huge. So it would not stop that source of fund coming in. So even if you, like you said, will not take the responsibility of government, and that amount coming in would have been used to, like I said, feed people, unemployment.
For how long? Feed people for how many days?
The fundamental question is, we've got government, and government has got to put its processes in place that would ensure that the issues of running of government is smooth. Why would we get individuals? Okay, let's go down memory lane. So it's about social contracts, right? So man, woman was in the state of nature, and they're like, oh, and the state of nature was anarchy, chaos, and all of that. And they decided to move from state of nature to civil society. Civil society then came, not civil society organization, civil society then came, oh, for us to be in civil society, we need a government to be able to take responsibility and take care of us. And in turn, we give all our loyalty, obedience to the government for making rules for security, for police, army, currency, including knowledge. What I learned, the government determines that. But in turn, the government then does two things, welfare and protection of lives and property. So that is the responsibility of government. So the citizens then have an obligation to hold the government accountable if they are not providing these two things. And if increasingly you are saying that this current government is telling us that the last administration failed. They've said it several times. They said, oh, the Buhari administration left a bad economy, so that's a sign of failure. And we kept waiting, we waited for 8 years. So should we keep waiting? Should citizens keep waiting? And the indices is not getting better. So there's a narrative that, oh, it's going to get worse until it gets better. So at what point do the citizens then come and say, oh, we are holding our government accountable? At what point do we then say, we go to the streets and we air our grievances in holding our government accountable?
Two things. Just a moment. While citizens, hold their governments accountable, we also know that things do not happen in a vacuum. Right now, we know that countries are interconnected. There have been theories around how some countries are at an advantage, some are at a disadvantage, and in some instances, some want that status quo of countries at a disadvantage to continue to stay the same. And there are countries in whose interest it is that African countries never prosper. It is in their interest that African countries remain in a state of disarray so that they can come in and exploit resources. These are things that we have heard. I'm sure that you have also heard this as well. Whenever it is that protests are, legitimate reasons, I mean, who can stop citizens from complaining when price of ordinary goods have tripled their prices, things that, you know, used to be within the reach of the average person. Even rich people complain these days getting it. Of course it is within the rights, but don't they also have a responsibility to exercise circumspection to ensure that, you know, protests, genuine protests, are not hijacked by interests which do not exactly wish us well?
Yeah, if you want to look at who's responsible to ensure that the process is not hijacked, so I agree, there would be interested parties that will take advantage of this. So from the IMF, the World Bank, that we think mean us good, they don't mean us good. We see it everywhere. So with the amounts that's the loans and all of that that's given to us, and how that the amount we pay back, and how the SAP, SAP, all coming from history where we have been through and all that. So we have not seen the positive impact of these Bretton Woods institutions, how they've worked for us. Countries like US at the point spend up to $2 billion a day subsidizing agriculture, but World Bank comes and says you cannot subsidize anything in your country. So every country subsidizes one thing or the other. Yeah, so there are debates around, do they actually mean us well? But of course, our leaders want resources, so they have to dance to their tune and all that. So if the country goes south, more south, do they stand to benefit more? Definitely, we're importing all of these things from them. By the time you get your whole act together, you'll be able to reduce and minimize that. It affects their own economy. But clearly, who has the responsibility to make sure that the protest is done harmoniously, there are no issues? I think it's both ways. So as civil society, for instance, you're not going to call out protests and say, people come out and let's burn down the country. No, it's one country, it's one united country, right? But it is the responsibility of the government, more of the responsibility of the government to ensure that the protest is peaceful. You can determine and say, you have to follow these routes in your protest. You can determine and say, but I don't think
we saw that. We saw an example of
going to the stadium is a different case.
Why is it different?
It's a different case. So where in the world have you seen people say, oh, go to a secluded environment? We have places for protest. So we have Unity Fountain, we have Millennium Park, we have those kind of places. People can come there, air their grievances, but they are also allowed to walk. They can walk. Why do you think the Parliament Square was built? Why do we have such a big space there with the thumb and her fist in the Parliament? Why do we have that? It is for protest. So National Assembly
that's a specific place.
Yeah, for protest. Yeah. So, but they would not allow citizens go there because again, citizens can go wild. The protesters might go wild. We do not support violent protests. So definitely nobody supports that. Neither do we support looting. The government needs to differentiate that, but the government has a responsibility. If citizens want to protest, in UN, on the average, check your records, on the average, you have 4 to 5 protests every day in the UN headquarters in New York. Every day you have 4 to 5.
That's a designated place.
Different locations around the UN facility. So you have different people, different groups protesting different things. So today you will see them
do people have to move around, or do protesters have to move around for protests to have been deemed successful?
No. So in the southeast, so the sit-at-home order is a form of protest. So though it might be forced on them, but it's a form of protest. So citizens can say, today we are not going to work, we are sitting at home. Oh. That's a protest. Wow. So we can say, oh, today, by 12 noon today, everybody go to your car, start pressing your horn, and start hitting a plate. That's a protest. So you have different ways.
In various ways.
Various ways of protest. So, on the street is not just the only way we protest, definitely.
But there's something you mentioned the other time about the Bretton Woods institutions taking advantage of certain vulnerabilities. Now, doesn't that in any way for you question patriotism of the inside sources, so to speak, that are used to foment these activities? Because if you know that the idea of these, Bretton Woods institutions is to make sure you don't develop so that they can take advantage of you, how is that able to happen if we are patriotic as a people?
But increasingly, we have seen our government dine with them constantly. So how do you stop the government? Or how do you get the government?
Let's decrypt it, because I like to decrypt this whole government thing.
Yes.
So when we say government, who? There are 3 arms of government.
Yes.
And there are almost 1,500 ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government of Nigeria alone. There are 36 states with their own state governments, 774 local governments in the country. So when we say government, which?
Executive. So led by the executive. So you have the executive and you have also
federal, states.
The executive, starting from the federal government has the statutory response. So when it comes to external engagements, the federal government, of course, takes responsibility in that. So before Lagos State government gets a loan from the World Bank, they have to get a sign-up from the executive, the federal executive, right? And they have to have a sign-up from the parliament. So those two, at the minimum, must be responsible. So the judiciary is only brought in when there are issues or questions. So like, oh, we need to go to court. So judiciary is also brought in. But primarily in order of preference, so it's first of all the executive. They are the ones that design the plan. And like, this is what we want for our implementation plan. And we need to take the amount of loan. But constantly, the government sees the executive majorly, who are the ones that develop and implement the plan. They see the Bretton Woods institution as great partners. Sometimes they could be partners to them. Of course, they provide those resources. But the aftermath of those, the effect of those on the economy. And what we ask the Bretton Woods institution is, we are quick to give out these resources, but we are not able to empower and get citizens to hold their government accountable on how these resources are used. Loan in itself is not a bad thing. So don't get us wrong. We're not saying that, oh, government shouldn't get loan. But we have been on this journey for years, and we are still not out of it. We're not saying that, oh, the country gets better. I'm giving you the example of the last 8 years. So do we want to wait another 4 years? Or like, oh, wait, let's give this current government a bit of time. Yes, I agree. We'll give them a bit of time. But what happens during the week, by Monday, you will have a clear clue. So by the time the government is saying we want to buy 2 presidential jets, you are building or finishing the vice president's residence with 16 billion naira. So those kind of expenditures send a wrong signal. So if the government or expanding, so you are starting with expanding your cabinet, you are creating an additional ministry and getting, this is the largest ministerial this we have had in a long while. So actually in the history of the country, actually. So if you are doing those, then the citizens will think that you've got enough resources, you've got this covered. So they will then place those demands, and by the time people are still hungry and all that, of course they will ask questions.
The second thing my apologies. The second thing that comes to me from that is, so let me just take your perspective on that as well, because we've talked about it a number of times. You reminded us the other time of the multidimensionally poor people as far as the 2022 report is concerned. 133 million Nigerians. Mm-hmm. Now that would sound vague to a good number of people. For instance, in Kano, there are 10.51 million people as of 2022 that are multidimensionally poor. Yobe has 3.23. So can we decrypt it to those states? Because the states also get resources from the federal government, and they also have their own internally generated revenue. And it would seem like to a large extent, no one is asking them, how are you spending this money? Everyone looks to the federal government, calls out the federal government, but no one is calling to the state government. So it would seem like, okay, the states are just dodging behind the federal government to take the flak. So are we cutting them some slack?
No, definitely not.
So how are we holding them accountable?
So the protest did not just happen at the federal level, also at FCT. It happened across the country.
But I don't remember anyone calling the name of the
governor. They were calling out the governor. So right now we're calling out the president, the governors, and even the local government. So thank God we have a bit of local government autonomy.
And National Assembly members.
Of course, National Assembly members. So we're calling out all arms of government. So I don't think we're separating. It's not a case of, we heard some governors saying that, it's the federal government that is responsible. That is not true. So that is not true. That's not the position of citizens or civil society organizations. So that's not true. The truth is that it's all across the board. So the federal government of course always takes the brunt because they are in the leadership position. They take that whole leadership space. And if you let's look at the truck of rice that was shared. You mentioned the multidimensional poverty. So if you use the number of the truck of rice, the number of people living in poverty, 133 million, and the 20 trucks that was shared across for each state that was shared across the country, on the average, you know what? You know what a module of rice is? A module of rice is about 1.25 kg. 1.25 kg. If you share it equally among the 133 million across the country with the number of people living in multidimensional poverty, 6 persons will be sharing a module of rice. That is how bad it is. So those little stopgap measures, which came from the federal government, it is expected that the states would complement it. We're not saying that social protection issues, they are very critical, they are important, but they are not long-term measures. We should look at long-term measures.
Do you think the states played any role in adding to that purse, that's storage?
To the storage? Yes, I think they definitely, in terms of the resources will be shared between, in terms of the resources used to get that, resources will be shared between the states, the federal, the state, and the local government. They definitely contributed to that. But they can do more. The states can do way more. We need to hold the state.
So how do we hold the state governments responsible? So because until the states, before an issue can get to the federal government, it must have been out of the control of the people in the states that, look, I'm feeling this too much. And if, as you noted, the states are pointing to the federal government, the people are going to go there.
The federal government also has a role to play there. Did we do so much to get local government autonomy, some form of local government autonomy we have right now? Who did that? The federal government. The president had to use his power, his position, and went through the court and got it done. So if the federal government wants to get the people, so this whole route we're going of criminalizing protests, making it look evil, is not a good thing for the country. So it also stops people from being able to hold their state governments and local government accountable. So it's not a good thing. But the federal government can play that facilitative role to ensure that the citizens, so by publishing the resources, by being accountable in their own stance. So as an organization, as ActionAid, we make sure that we come to the board clean. We make sure that we are accountable. We are also transparent in all that we do. So that when it comes to tax, 100%, so that when we are holding government accountable, we know that if the federal government wants to play that role, that facilitative role, then the federal government has to be very accountable, very open, and then encourage citizens to hold their state governments accountable. But clearly, what we see is, the federal government, the legislatures, the state governments, they are, for us, it's about they are the ones benefiting. So the Council of State. So when you look at the Council of State, who are those that are there? Somehow they benefit from the status quo. But the status quo, the way it is right now, we've got to do something, or else at some point it will just not hold anymore.
Well, only recently, ActionAid also held its own policy. I think it's policy plan for the next how many years now?
10 years.
For the next 10 years. Yeah. Do you want to tell us the areas of advocacy that you will be focusing on?
Okay, so for us, it's ActionAid is looking at the next 10 years to be able to mobilize Nigerians in contributing to getting 5 million Nigerians out of poverty. So 5 million Nigerians, the biggest issue that is facing us is issues of poverty, of course, and inequality. And if we're able to, the last government, President Buhari's government, said we're going to get 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years. So, but for us, we are looking at contributing to 5 million Nigerians in 10 years, actively working with citizens. Of course, we're going to work with various stakeholders, the government, the private sector. Of course, the media is a critical actor in all of this. And the way we are doing it is through citizens organizing, citizens mobilizing. We have this group called the Smallholder Women Farmers, made up of over 2 million smallholder farmers that we are actively working with, and looking at the challenges, the issues that affect them. Recently, we did a survey with them that shows that 70% of them said that two things that affect them drastically in terms of their input, that affects up to 50% of their production, is insecurity in farms. They're not able to go to farms, so that affects 50% of their production. And the second one was issues of loans and access to credit facility. So 72% and 73% respectively. So clearly, those kind of group of people, we want to work with them. And if you're able to get those kind of majority of people out of poverty, women, young persons, and persons with disability, those are the three critical groups that we are focusing on to help get out of poverty, to work with to get out of poverty. But we can't do this alone. We're going to be working with groups, movements, and groups. So you will see us more on the streets. So that's an assurance. So you're going to see us more on the streets. And we're going to be asking more critical questions because of the system of government that we have agreed to practice, and we must hold our government accountable.
So if I get you right, when the Council of State says the protest is a regime change attempt, Clearly, you don't buy that.
No, I don't.
So what they should do then is that you can't paint everybody with one brush.
That's it.
As much as there are people who may have done things untoward, they should distill those people from genuine people who came out to protest. So that's the bottom line.
100%. So identify those people, handle them. They are criminals. They'll go to court and deal with it. But do not say because of a few persons. What's the proportion? Is it the 50%? If it's just 10%, it's easy to identify them. So they've identified some accounts and all of that. So you investigate those accounts. I hope they are not wrongly tagged. That's another thing.
Yeah,
so they're not wrongly tagged.
We've not been able to ask them questions about this narrative that they're talking about, the crypto funds, the funds they say they traced. I think 4 billion traced to Kano, Abuja, Katsina political bigwigs. So who are these bigwigs? Did they have any political agreements with them before time?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Can I ask a question? Our current president funded protests in the past. So I think that was legitimate. I don't think that was legitimate.
So, Mr. NSA, do you consider that as sponsoring protests? Was that tantamount to regime change at that time too? So, questions, Mr. NSA. Thank you for coming on. Andrew Mamadou is the country director, Action Aid Nigeria. Well, that is the show today. We thank you all for watching. We don't know if we'll see our here tomorrow, so you have to wait and find out. I'm Chamberlain, Lisa. Goodbye.
Well, it certainly feels good to be surrounded this morning. Thank you so much for being a part of the program as well. We saw some of your messages earlier. Thank you for sending them in. I'm helping yourself.
I'm Ayo. Marking, they don't mind these two folks. I'll see you tomorrow.